Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dan Moore, and I'm here with Stuart Ritchie to talk about how to help media companies save time and money. Your hosts today are me and Stuart, and I am the head of developer relations at FusionAuth. And what that means is that I help evangelize and help our partner evangelize FusionAuth and help our customers and partners be successful. So that could range from doing customer support, writing documentation, example applications, and helping with the sales process. So I have been a developer for about 20 years and have definitely created my own authentication systems and integrated with others. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk about how auth systems can help media companies. Stuart, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Stuart. I am the founder, managing director at a WordPress development agency in London called Powered by Coffee. The company's been going for about 10 years, started by myself and have grown into a small team over the last decade. We have been developing a bit of a niche working with media companies, publishing companies, and anyone with a lot of content, helping them work with WordPress and do really anything involving lots and lots of content.
Great. So let's go ahead and jump into a little bit about FusionAuth. So FusionAuth has been around for a number of years. We rebranded from a different name a couple of years ago, and we spun out of a company that's been around for over a decade. And what we really do for you is handle these things: authentication, authorization, user management. We are a standalone application. We can run anywhere. That includes data centers, private cloud, public cloud, even kiosks. We actually have one customer who's running on Raspberry Pis. So what we firmly believe is that authentication, authorization, user management is functionality that makes sense to offload from the core of your business-facing application. And the reason why is that every application has users. And so if you don't offload it to a centralized repository such as FusionAuth, you are going to have a patchwork of data and of compliance. So you're going to end up with siloed data. So your user might be registered, a single person may be registered across 3 different applications or 3 different websites, but you'll have no way of knowing that unless you manually build like a data matching process. And if you do, when someone updates their data, it's not going to necessarily flow to all your different websites in a way that might make your understanding of the user less full than it could be. And then you also are going to have a patchwork of compliance policies. And so whether you're talking about GDPR or the UK Data Protection Act, you need to make sure that if someone wants their user data deleted, you can do that. Or on a more prosaic, less legal note, like if you want to make sure that all your passwords are conforming to certain standards, you're going to have to re-implement that across every application, again, unless you use a centralized auth system. So this has some other benefits too. You end up with one view of customer data. And from the admin side, that looks like one place to see all of a user's interactions with applications across your business, or also one place to see all their profile data, to enrich that profile data, possibly with other data that you've found or acquired in some other way. And for the user, there's one place to update their password, one place to update their user profile, and other things such as their consents, right? That's an important thing that you want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of and a firm grasp of. Another benefit for a centralized auth system is if you want to add any integration layer, you can, again, if you have multiple auth systems, one for each application, you can go ahead and integrate those at that layer, but it's much simpler to do it at one place. An example might be if you wanted to allow your users to log in using Facebook or Google. You can definitely put that functionality in each application, or you can configure it once in FusionAuth, trust that FusionAuth has done it right, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. The same thing is true with more enterprisey type of identity federation like SAML or Azure Active Directory. You can re-implement it again and again and again, or you can do it once in a centralized user auth system. The last reason why we really firmly believe that a user auth system is a great fit for a kind of a centralized single point of truth is security. No one likes it when their login information is lost, right? Just ask Equifax over here in the US. But FusionAuth, again, because you don't have this patchwork of different user authentication systems in each application, but you have one centralized place, that means you can concentrate your security efforts on it and hardening the infrastructure that it runs on. And because the FusionAuth lives and breathes this stuff, right? We don't think about anything other than authentication, authorization, user management. That's our job. We can undertake steps that your development teams may want to, they may know about, they may not have time to. We can do regularly. So we do things like hire companies to penetration test our application. We do this regularly, and if they find anything, we immediately fix it. We also have a bug bounty program that lets random passersby who might be interested in poking holes in FusionAuth security infrastructure to try to do so. And if they do, we aren't mad at them. We reward them because they found something that we want to fix right away. And then we also keep on top of the latest vulnerabilities and monitor CVEs. So this is why we think that it makes sense to offload your user authentication system. It gives you one view of data. It lets you do complex integrations in one place, and it will result in a better security for your user data. So I'm going to hand it back to Stuart for a demo. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Stan. So we'll get to the demo in a second, but just a little bit about why this is relevant to publishing businesses and media businesses in particular. So from our experience working with media companies over the last few years, we've seen a number of different things happen. There's been an explosion of people interested in memberships and an explosion of people interested in subscriptions and an explosion of people interested in paywalls and metering and things like that. So things where you give people a certain number of views and then they have to log in or subscribe to see the rest. And through that, we have kind of developed a bit of an understanding, let's say, about why identity is so important for media companies. And the long and the short of it is that it comes down to revenue. The world is kind of changing at the moment, as you might have noticed, and this has been a particularly difficult year with the pandemic and various other trust issues kind of going on worldwide that has made traditional revenue models for publishers and media businesses very, very difficult. If you look at the physical media world, where a lot of magazines and print material had been sold kind of while people were commuting or waiting for things or newsstand or when they were out and about, that is just completely gone. There's been a huge dip in the amount of printed advertising sales. In digital, we saw huge drops in CPMs across ad channels, across publishers everywhere. When it comes to budgets coming from advertisers, there's less and less of it going to media as more and more is going towards Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, and other places that are soaking up people's attention. Further, looking at programmatic exchanges are helping advertisers get their eyeballs and get attention even cheaper than people were already able to provide that. And huge amount of ads are going around at the moment with everything that is kind of poor about the system and poor about advertising is leading to terrible user experiences that are turning users off websites. So they go to the site is slow. They have to click off 5 or 6 different notices and GDPR things and pop-up banners and slow loading ads to get to what they actually want to see. And then people are taking up ad blockers and scripters to automatically get rid of this stuff. And increasing amounts of data literacy, where people are now more aware of their data that is being harvested by media companies to provide advertising, targeted advertising, which is a great thing. I want to see ads that are relevant to my interests, but I'm more and more concerned about what is happening to that data and where that might be used. And I'm not the only one. More and more people are becoming more and more concerned about where their data is and are blocking trackers. All of this is leading to the amount that a publisher can make from advertising dropping significantly. Then the final thing we kind of see changing is, again, related to COVID. So we, in the UK, see a lot of media companies have an events arm. That was their kind of version of diversification and spreading their risk. Last time, kind of post 2008 financial crash, whenever there was another big drop in CPMs, everyone went, fine, we're going to do high ticket events and get people in the door and give them a great experience, and they'll pay us for the benefit of that, both on the ticket sales and on the sponsorship side. Companies being very interested in getting in front of those audiences, paying a handsome premium to get in there. All of this is to say that for media companies and media businesses that don't have existing models that allow them to have relationships with their subscribers, advertising has become a real problem. And these publishers need to increasingly have direct relationships with the people consuming their media. It's really the only way that we can see that people are going to survive. And we see more and more trends towards this. Companies where the online version has been free have been moving towards paywalls and metering. And some are going just completely, no, you need to be a member to read anything. And that means that we have to know who users are. Suddenly we go from not needing to have any user data for a publisher or a media company beyond who are editors and how do they log in, into, it's like, okay, we might have a subscriber base of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100, 200,000. So the most straightforward way of working this is to have a straight up membership access system where there's a section of your site or in the content you provide, you charge access for it, someone has membership, they get in, try to access and they don't have access to, they get a little, no, you need to subscribe or upgrade to go through with that. And to do that, we need to have user accounts. A more complicated version of this is where we might do something around metering, where so much content is free over a certain period of time, but then whenever the users used up all that free allocation, they've got to jump on and upgrade and subscribe and get that next set that they pay for. This is hugely more complicated because you have to track particular interactions. You have to track, say, okay, this guest user read this, and they read this, and they read this, so let's make sure the next page they view, they get that metering system. There's pros and cons to both of these systems. The straightforward memberships, it's a lot easier to manage, it's a lot more straightforward, everyone knows where they stand all the time. Metering can cause problems. There is SEO issues, and there can be support issues. Authentication systems can be hard to manage. It can all get really, really complex. But the benefit of it is that a user gets a taste of your content, sees that they like it, and then are much more likely to subscribe. Now, the big part where this all connects to is that managing access. And this usually comes down to the content management system that the publisher is using. For things that we see a lot of WordPress, as you might expect. So the thing about WordPress is that it's a great CMS. Your editors probably love it compared to everything else that's out there. But it's a terrible user management system. You're combining editorial access and management access with subscriber access. And if something can go badly wrong there, where people end up with the wrong permissions and they can end up in your systems that they should not be. And also, WordPress can scale just fine for content and things like that, but the user database side can have some problems as you get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's really not easy for media companies and publishers to do this, where they want one membership system that allows their editors to do their work and a second user authentication system that manages access for subscribers. It's also further complicated that a publisher may actually have lots and lots of channels and lots of different funnels and ways that they access subscribers. There might be a third-party subscription seller, that is like providing deals and sort of aggregating stuff, and a user can sign up there. They have to be added to the print database and then given access where appropriate to digital. There can be social platforms like Facebook, where you can run advertising and have people sign up directly from Facebook. The publisher may be running their own campaigns where they may have landing pages and other funnels that need to capture those signups and make sure they get into the user database correctly. Direct memberships, where people are signing up on the site. And you may have bulk offers and a sales team, where a salesperson is going out and selling an institution 20,000 copies or 20,000 memberships to a particular title. Suddenly all of those users need to be given access. So at one time, each of those kind of funnels and channels would have had their own membership database that needed to be managed. And you can imagine the nightmare of authenticating against that. It's like, okay, this user is a member here, but that's expired, but they also have a subscription over here from another time they signed up. It just adds so much complexity. We also see a lot of time, a lot of brand consolidation at the moment, where there are purchases happening. To kind of date this webinar a little bit, recently, I believe Huffington Post was acquired by BuzzFeed. So I'm not saying that they're going to integrate their membership systems, but on a smaller brand level, that is actually possible. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that a medium-sized B2B content company will acquire another network and need to bring those user systems together. So then how does a publisher manage all these different data streams and all these different sources of identity? And this is where we see things like FusionAuth come in. And just to reiterate on some of the things we've gone through already, why do we keep building authentication systems over and over again? We wouldn't think to build our own payment processor. We have companies like Stripe and PayPal to do that. We wouldn't think of building our own analytics anymore. Google Analytics and Segment do that great. So, but authentication and identity management is one of the things that keeps coming up, where we go, okay, we'll reinvent that, reinvent that, reinvent that. It has to go in basically every app, but we still do it all the time. We miss things. Things get pushed off the edge, where using something like FusionAuth, we can get there faster because we're not thinking about that. This is what FusionAuth does day in, day out. And they do a much better job of it than we can do on our own, or your development team can do on their own. And like the guy said, there is a huge amount of security testing that goes on there. They're staying ahead of the standards, and they give us enough control that we can really dig into an application, or a customer's kind of permissions model and replicate it within FusionAuth to give all the access controls that are needed. There's also the unified user profiles that we can jump into and see, and the application and rules system, where we can sort of control who has access to what. Cool. So now I'm going to try and show us the short demo.
Yeah, let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Great. Hi there. Just a quick demo on what we can do with FusionAuth and WordPress. So just a little introduction to our setup here. We have FusionAuth running inside of Docker, with 3 WordPress instances set up, all A, B, and C here. I'm logged into each one in the admin. I'm also running 2 browsers, Chrome and Safari. Chrome, I'll be kind of showing you around FusionAuth and what it's like for me logged in as the WordPress admin. And on Safari, we'll be doing logins as guest users and things like that we'll create through FusionAuth. So for each of our WordPresses, we have created an application inside of FusionAuth. An application within FusionAuth is really something that a user can log into. It has its own settings, its own roles, and then we assign users to roles within the application to give them access. And as you can see here, if we go into WordPress A, and we can manage the roles, and we've got administrator, author, contributor, editor, subscriber. And then on the flip side, we've got users. the moment we've just got myself because I'm the admin, so I've set myself up. Now what we want to do is add a new user to FusionAuth. So let's go ahead and add Dan at FusionAuth.com, and I don't think that's Dan's real email address. We're not going to email Dan to set up a password today, but we will just throw in a nice secure password there for Dan. We're not going to talk about any of our other options here. We can go into that in more detail if you want later on, but for now, we're just going to set up a really basic profile. Okay, so we've got Dan at FusionAuth. Here's the source phrase user. Now let's pop over to the registrations panel here. A registration is what connects a user to an application. So let's add a registration. Let's add Dan to WordPress A as an administrator, and we'll save that. And we'll add another registration. Dan doesn't need to do so much inside of WordPress B, so we'll just add him as a contributor. Great. So we've got WordPress A, WordPress B, set up as an administrator and a contributor. So this is our WordPress A. We'll just check the admin bar, definitely WordPress A. Give it a wee refresh. It can be a wee bit slow because we're running it behind a proxy with Docker. It can take a while to build out that cache. Great, and I'm the only admin in there at the moment. So let's swap out to Safari, bring up a new window. Great, and we're presented with the login screen for this WordPress instance. Dan, the user we want to add, FusionAuth.com, super secret password for Dan, and let's hit login. No, we don't want to remember Dan's password. And lo and behold, straight in there, we've added Dan as a new user inside of this WordPress install. Let's hit that users table. There we see Dan FusionAuth, not set any name, but he's also been added as an administrator. So that worked exactly as we had hoped. Dan has been added as administrator because we had allowed him to be because of his FusionAuth account. Now let's jump across to WordPress B. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. Dan at FusionAuth.com. Fill in his very secure password. We'll log in again. No, we don't want to save his password. And lo and behold, Dan has been added once again. This time with a few less permissions, let's say. You can't quite see that user table, but that's fine. So we'll just nip back to Chrome quickly into WordPress B. We'll do a quick refresh there. And there we go. We can see we've got Dan at FusionAuth.com. He's been added as a contributor, just as we could sort of set up in the FusionAuth rules. Now, this is a bigger site. We're going to need some more help. So I'm going to add Coral. Coral's our marketing manager at Powered by Coffee. So let's add Coral. It's not Coral's real email address, thank goodness. Show password. We need to know this password for now. Yes, it's very weak. We'll just set up a quick demo password. And we want Coral to be an administrator. And yes, I confirm our use of a weak password. So let's add that user. Great. Coral is now added to WordPress B within WordPress. Let's quickly jump back over to FusionAuth and check our users. And here we go. Coral, we can see, has been added. Let's check her out. And there we go. She's been added to WordPress B as an administrator and therefore can access WordPress B as an administrator. So the applications we've shown you so far, WordPress A and B, are set up using the direct manipulation API. So we can call REST endpoints to create users, to authenticate users, manage users, create applications, set rules, and things like that. FusionAuth also lets us do single sign-on, where FusionAuth takes over the user login process as well. So just let me quickly swap back to Safari. Great. And where we have WordPress C. So we'll hit up our normal WordPress admin login. Great. Except in this case, we don't necessarily want to do that. We've added a new endpoint to the WordPress rewrite system / login, which is going to take us to where FusionAuth has taken over the admin entirely. So the user we just created for Coral at bbc.io with her super secure password. And we'll try log in now. Don't want to save that. And oh dear, it looks like we've got a bit of a problem where Coral isn't registered to access this application. So let's check out what's up with our account here. Okay, we'll just refresh it, make sure we've definitely got the most recent version. Okay, so we can see she's registered with WordPress B, but not WordPress C. So let's add her as the administrator to WordPress C. And let's save that. Okay, so you can see WordPress B and WordPress C. Let's flip back over to Safari, where we will go to our login page again. And all of a sudden, Coral has access to WP Admin. Single sign-on, FusionAuth provides kicked in whenever we try to access the login page again. It already knew who she was, but we've updated her permissions this time. So she's able to access WordPress C as the administrator. So as you can see, there's lots can be done here with FusionAuth, and this is really just touching the basics of managing identity with both the REST API that they provide and the single sign-on and OAuth APIs. There's plenty more that could be done. Thank you for watching. Great. Yeah, that's our little demo, pre-canned, just for reliability. You know how these things can go. Once burned, twice shy. So I think I'm gonna hand back over to Dan to talk a little bit more about some FusionAuth specific functionality that might be of interest. You're muted, Dan.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a webinar if someone didn't do that once. Thanks for that demo, Stuart. That was awesome. Let me share my screen. So I am either more brave or more foolhardy than Stuart. So I have a live demo going on here. And I have spun up an instance of FusionAuth in London, in the AWS region of London. And FusionAuth Cloud is a managed services offering that you can use to offload even more of your user auth management worries to FusionAuth, because we take care of upgrades and securing your system. And we can do this in any AWS region. So if you have, for instance, German users and you need to make sure that all their PII is stored in Germany, you can spin up a FusionAuth instance in Frankfurt. So I have loaded 1 million users into this system, and they're not fancily named or anything like that, just imported user. But I'm going to focus more on the CIAM aspects, right? I think Stuart did a great job of showing you the IAM aspects, where you want to make sure that your employees have the right level of access to your systems. I'm going to show you a little bit more of what your customers might be able to do. So I'm going to, as Stuart said, the first thing to do usually is to add an application. That's what people are going to log into. I'm going to add a wine website.com, and I'm going to add a couple of roles. So we have a user role, which I'm going to make the default role so that anybody who is registers for this application will automatically get that role. I'm going to add an admin role and make them a super user. And then I'm going to add a sommelier role, because roles can be, typical and tied to an application, right? Those roles that Stuart did for WordPress were kind of defined by WordPress, right? FusionAuth needed to make sure they matched what WordPress was expecting. But if you are building your own custom web application, you can add the roles that make sense for your use case and for your business. So we could add sommelier, we could add restaurant owner, whatever we wanted. And then the application would receive those roles after authentication and could deliver different functionality based on that. There's a lot more configuration options. I'm not going to go through all these. The other one I want to call attention to was self-service registration. So this is a great way for you to easily let your users sign up for your application themselves. And FusionAuth offers 2 different mechanisms for doing this. There's basic, where you can basically control these 6 or 7 fields, which ones are enabled, which ones are required. Um, and so it's a very kind of super solid standard registration form that FusionAuth gives you out of the box. Yeah, there's also advanced registration forms which let you create your own custom registration fields. And again, there's documentation on the FusionAuth website. I'm not going to dive into that too much. The last thing I'm going to do is talk about um, registration for an application, right? So the basic registration form that I talked about above was for when a user first comes to your site. But a registration form is what happens when they register for a particular application. So I've created a wine uh, website registration form, and that lets me collect additional attributes about a user that are related specifically to this application. So let's go ahead and save this off. And then I'm not going to add a user, but I'm going to pick on Coral again, and I'm going to add her to the wine website. So you can see here that the roles are specific to the roles that I created for this application. So I don't know if she's a sommelier, but I'm going to give her that role. And then I can add this additional user profile data, right, which is really tied just to this application. So I can add that she's a fan of Pinot Noirs and she really loves red wine. And so you can start to, and this is obviously just a demo, but you can start to see that you can add arbitrary user data values, right? Both at the user level. So if it's something that the user it's an attribute of the user that won't change, like their age or their phone number or other contact information, or you can add things that are specific for each application, like the fact that they're signed up for a wine website and they really like red wine. I'm going to save this off. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is, because I could go on for a while, but I understand that we all have limited time, that the search capabilities. So you can see that we had 1 million users, right? I showed you I loaded 1 million users, and this is on the lowest tier of the FusionAuth Cloud, suitable for proof of concepts and demos, and still is relatively snappy searching 1 million users. So I can search by username and email address. I can also search in a more detailed fashion, and that can include, which users are registered for which application. It can also, look for users that have an application and a given role, which would still be Coral in this case, but nobody has the admin role in um, the wine application right now. The other thing I want to point out here is that for your development team, you actually have the full power of Elasticsearch. So if I want to search on this, you can search, and then you can see that we have integrated with Elasticsearch. So this gives you the ability to build your own search capabilities. So if you want to search to find all the users who love white wine or have registered between this date and that date, you can absolutely do so. And my final point about this demo is that everything I've shown you in this user interface, you can do via the API. Stuart mentioned the APIs a little bit when he was doing his demo. And I just want to reiterate that everything you can do in the UI, you can do via the API. There's actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to fib. There's one exception. So, and it's not really relevant to this demo, but everything else you can do. So you can search, you can add users, you can create applications, you can sign users up for applications, all via this very developer-friendly API. So it's not just you who are going to like this. It is also the people who help develop your web applications if you aren't the primary developer. So that is all I have for the demo. So I'm gonna go back to the presentation, and I think we will jump into Q&A.
Great.
Great. So it looks like we have a question. First question is, how does FusionAuth handle two-factor authentication? Stuart, do you want to chime in and I'll jump in after?
Yeah, so it's built right into it. Um, with your um, API calls, say that you're making to authenticate a user, you can use that to trigger a send out to one of the two-factor authentication services. I believe you may have to correct me down here that it works okay with almost every authenticator app and works over SMS as well. I believe via Twilio was the service. Correct? Not correct?
100%. Yeah, yeah. So
Great.
we support those two different forms of
Yeah,
time-based one-time passwords, which are Authy and Google Authenticator, and then also Twilio and SMS.
sure. And as with
Great.
almost everything, it can be done entirely through the FusionAuth UI if you decide to use the hosted login pages. And if you do it on using the APIs, there's a bit more you have to do yourself to manage it, but it's all right there ready to go.
Yep. Great. Another question came in. How does FusionAuth handle social logins? So I'll jump in on that one. So FusionAuth comes out of the box with support for Twitter, Facebook, Apple, and Google, kind of the big social logins, and those are the configurations documented, and it's very easy to set those up. Uh, if you have other kind of social providers that you want to integrate with, as long as they support OIDC, which is kind of the modern standard for social authentication, or they support SAML, which is kind of the older school one, FusionAuth supports those as well. So we're always interested in finding out what ways people are using FusionAuth, but that those two plus the four that I mentioned at the beginning are cover the vast majority of use cases people have mentioned to us. Anything on that, Stuart?
No, I think you've covered it really, really handily there.
Okay, great. Next question is, does FusionAuth support passwordless login? So,
Yes, it does. And very easy to use as well. So again, if you're working with the hosted kind of management pages, it's a setting that can be toggled on to enable kind of a magic link that can be sent. So the way then that works is that an email is sent to a user with a token, clicks the token, and then the assumption is that if they have that email address and access to reach that, then that is a good substitute for actually authenticating them directly. From the API side, you can send a REST API call that will trigger that email to be sent, or you can request that token yourself to send it using your own system.
mhm. Yeah, that was a great summation. I would just add, from a security perspective, I'm of two minds about passwordless, right? Because on the one hand, you're basically giving someone a magic link that if anyone else gets a hold of that, they're going to um, be able to log in as you. We work around that by you as a developer or as the administrator can configure how long that link is good for. And the other thing that kind of counterbalances that in my mind is that people take really good care of their email accounts, and they take far better care of their email accounts and the passwords around that than they do some random application they signed up for 6 months ago, right? I mean, how many times have you received a notice saying, hey, you need to update your password on site XYZ, and you just don't bother to do that? Whereas if I got that from my email provider, I would hop, skip, and a jump to that. And a lot of people
Yeah,
do turn on MFA for their email providers. So I think magic links are actually a really great UX, user-friendly solution, as long as you're kind of aware of the security, trade-offs that happen. So
yeah.
great. So next question up is, how easy is it to add different data to users? So we saw a little bit of that with the wine stuff, but Stuart, do you want to speak to that? Because I know that's really kind of crucial to the
Yeah,
help
of
for
course.
publishers.
So there's a couple of different ways we can add data to users. It can be stored directly on the user's profile. So I think the easiest way to think about it is almost like a key value pair, where the profile has a whole section data where you can put arbitrary key values in. So you can store any kind of random metadata that you want about your customer to make the site work within FusionAuth, and it will just be there until you remove it. And again, that's supported by the full REST spectrum HTTP verbs. We can also store data against the registration object. So the thing that connects the user to a particular application, if there's something very specific there, say membership information or when that registration should expire, that can be stored there. Again, all very, very handy. And it can obviously be managed as well through the forms and the hosted pages that maybe you want to take us through, Dan.
Sure. Yeah. So that is actually kind of a newish feature last couple of months. Really excited about that. But
Yeah.
we've built the ability for administrators to manage any custom data they want within FusionAuth. So if it's tied to the user profile, users can admins can build forms, or one level of admin can build a form that other admins, other people with different roles within FusionAuth can use to edit that and keep that up to date. And I don't want to promise any future functionality, but it is on our roadmap to build it so that the users themselves can manage that profile data. And that'll be within FusionAuth. Right now, you end up having to engage with a development agency like Powered by Coffee to build out that user profile update page, which with the APIs is not hard to do, but it's just one more thing that we say, why are we reinventing this wheel over and over again? The one thing I did want to say about the user data, we had a customer. I was talking to a customer the other day, and they found it super useful to be able to store kind of that arbitrary data for their migration process. So, for instance, they actually had like an old database, and they stored the key of that old database, the key of the user in that old database in FusionAuth, so that if they had an application that still needed to talk to that old database, the application could talk to FusionAuth, get that old user ID, and then still go and look up against that old legacy database. So they didn't have to do a full-scale migration of all the user data. That was what worked for their use case. But to me, that just shows the flexibility of being able to store, as Stuart said, the key value pairs of anything on the user or the registration objects.
Yeah, it's really, really useful. We've done similar where we've stored IDs from old migrations to be like, okay, if we need to match backwards, we can do that. Another kind of data feature we find quite handy is the ability to store things like consents directly against the user object. So if you're watching this and get a chance to go in and take one of the FusionAuth demos, have a look at some of the options that are given there for both the arbitrary data you can save against the user, but also the kind of predefined stuff. So things around like, is this registrant a part of a larger family? So connecting users up so that there's manageable consent there, actual consents for things like marketing, or saying, yes, we've got permission to give this user particular things, all the way through to when did that user last log in? What is the kind of events process that they have gone through to get here? So it's a really rich and versatile data model for a user.
Great. Yeah, no, that's really great. And the one other thing, I mean, this kind of data stuff gets me really fired up. The one other thing you could say is that you actually can sometimes, FusionAuth recognizes sometimes that you need to get your data someplace else. And so there are about 20 different webhooks that you can sign up for. And so if you needed to pull login information away from, in near real time from FusionAuth into some other system, you can have that other system be configured to accept a webhook from FusionAuth. And when someone logs in or someone registers, FusionAuth can fire off all that rich JSON data to this other system, and then they can do, it can do what it needs to do, right? Whether that's, updating other systems or, compiling stuff for analytics. So
yeah. So that webhook system is particularly useful where you've got a bit of a legacy system like WordPress that has a defined user system. So I mean, if you were using something like a Laravel, where you can have your own entirely custom user authentication system and make it work exactly as you want, you're free to use FusionAuth entirely. With WordPress, particularly if you're managing editorial users and folk who have access to the admin panel, when someone's role changes in FusionAuth, the webhooks to push that out and say, this user needs to be updated, comes from a trusted source. Here are the keys we need to pass to prove it came from this. It's a fantastic way of managing that and making it happen.
Yeah, I was kind of noticing that during your demo. It was bi-directional, right? That's what it appeared to be. And so you implement that using webhooks as part of it.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's great. Cool. How does FusionAuth, sorry, now I want to get back to the questions. How does FusionAuth
Sorry.
handle, no, I think it's super valuable conversation for sure. How does it handle lost passwords? So do you want to talk to that or should I?
You go for it.
Sure. So FusionAuth handles, and again, this is one of the benefits of using an auth system, right? As Stuart said, we think about this day in, day out. We've handled like 15 different workflows that you will eventually have to handle if you build your own authentication system. And lost password is obviously a primary one, and it's a great way to save money is to make that self-service. And you want to make sure that it's secure, you want to make sure it doesn't get abused, and you want to make sure that people aren't using it to credential stuff. But FusionAuth takes care of that workflow as well as numerous other ones like letting letting an admin person lock someone out, setting up actioning on users so that they can be locked out for a certain period of time, and other workflows such as that. So FusionAuth handles forgot password flows. And I would say that, as Stuart mentioned, there's always two ways to interact with FusionAuth. You can have total control and use the APIs, and that means that you're kind of building your own user interface on top of it. Or you can use FusionAuth's hosted login pages, which are very, very themable and can support multiple different languages and can basically be made to look and feel like your website, but they aren't actually on your website. They're hosted by FusionAuth, which is why we call them that. Anything to add about lost passwords?
Yeah, from the developer perspective, again, it's as easy to trigger as, okay, we need to make a REST request to get a token that we can then authenticate, and we can either have FusionAuth send that email for us, or we can pull the tokens out and send the emails ourselves. When it comes to interacting with the user's API, when we request user data back, it's full of stuff around this kind of what the user status is. So if the user has been locked out, or that user is in the middle of a password change request, or even perhaps more importantly, if say you have a security policy that says passwords have to be refreshed every so many days, that can be managed within FusionAuth. So we can get a flag back on the user API that says, actually, this user needs to change their password, so lock them out until that password change has been made, which is, it's not for every organization, but there are some use cases where something like that's a huge amount of time and effort for a developer on team to do, and it's something that can just be passed out almost entirely to the FusionAuth APIs.
Great. Cool. I think we have time for one more question. It is getting on. So I want to respect everyone's time. Last question is, how does FusionAuth scale? And I'll take that and say that, obviously, if you run FusionAuth on a T2 micro on AWS, which is, super small and only has a little bit of RAM, it's not going to handle it as well as a bigger, beefier box, right? So a large part of what FusionAuth scales, how FusionAuth scales, is based on the hardware that you're running it on. But we have scaled FusionAuth in testing, load testing, to 100 million users. And you saw the behavior of that FusionAuth Cloud instance with 1 million users. And we have customers that are running with millions of users in FusionAuth. And the way the architecture works is it is horizontally scalable. So it's a stateless service. And obviously you have substate, which is pushed back to your database, and that needs to be able to scale as well. But we have not run into any issues with FusionAuth as long as the hardware is sufficient. So Stuart, do you have any real world horror stories about that, or are we good to wrap up?
I have no real world horror stories about scaling FusionAuth. It's always been very straightforward. Almost everything else I've got we broke this by making too many requests, but I have not managed that yet with FusionAuth in any instances we have worked with. So good job.
Great. Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And Stuart, I'd like to thank you for the demo and also for sharing kind of your unique insight into the unique needs of publishers today and the challenges they face. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Dan.